1930s Hollywood produced a lot of great stuff. The screwball comedy maybe being its crown jewel. The two smartest movies to come out of that tradition of smart rom-coms were His Girl Friday, which maybe I'll get to sometime, and The Philadelphia Story. Not saying the absolute best, since It Happened One Night or Bringing Up Baby would pop out and punch me in the eye. But it's impressive that 3 of the top 4 I just mentioned include Cary Grant or Katherine Hepburn in major roles. The Philadelphia Story was remade 16 years later as a musical, High Society. I saw both these movies so many times in my childhood I could barely say which was which, not meaning that I'd ever mistake Jimmy Stewart for Frank Sinatra or think, hey, which was the one in color and with songs? But on a recent back-to-back watching, I was surprised about which lines showed up in one film and not the other.
Hello, Dexter. Hello, George. Hello, Mike.
And what storylines got dropped entirely. Katherine Hepburn at this time already had several films under her belt.
Oh, we're going to talk about me, are we? Goody.
Including several solid dramas. If you haven't seen Stage Door with Hepburn and my other fave, Ginger Rogers, you should do yourself a favor and go check it out. And she had a couple screwball comedies, including Bringing Up Baby. She'd wowed audiences back in her undergrad at Bryn Mawr with her extraordinarily athletic performance as Rosalind in As You Like It. That's a role I'd kill to go back and see. But the papers were not as crazy about her, even going so far as to call her box office poison. Her aristocratic air was apparently a bit much.
English history, it's always fascinated me. Cromwell, Robin Hood, Jack the Ripper. Where did he teach? I mean your father.
Grace Kelly, who took on the same role in the remake, also has an aristocratic air, but Kelly's looks like it's going to melt into a puddle if somebody flips the right switch, whereas Hepburn looked like you flip that switch and she'll kick your butt. The role of heiress Tracy Samantha Lord was written for Hepburn. Haughty does not even begin to describe Tracy, which is kind of central to the plot. Hepburn plays a divorced woman on the eve of her marriage to a very different man from her first husband. Husband number 1, C.K. Dexter Haven, played by Cary Grant, is a now reformed alcoholic writer and also an aristocrat. Husband number 2, played by Who Cares, is a coal miner who has become a wealthy manager and is a bit puritanical.
But a man expects his wife
To behave herself naturally.
to behave herself naturally.
Into this love triangle comes a pair of cynical reporters sent over to cover the wedding, one played by a cranky Jimmy Stewart and the other by a spunky, hilarious Ruth Hussey.
I think men are wonderful. The little dears.
Both reporters are disgusted by the job of covering a society wedding, by the upper class, and by the probability that Dexter is using them as revenge against his ex-wife. What they don't know is that Dexter's actually using them to suppress a salacious story by their own nasty editor about Tracy's father. Dexter, against all odds, is actually a stand-up guy. Everybody has very high principles in this movie. Dexter sacrifices his self-respect for the dignity of his ex-wife. The reporters sacrifice their self-respect for a buck, but Stewart, at least, is pretty vocal about how degrading that is. Tracy sacrifices everybody else for her own idea of perfection, and when everybody else falls short, they all turn around and roast her. Earlier casting had placed Clark Gable as Dexter, and either Joseph Cotton or ideally Spencer Tracy as the reporter. Brilliant castings which could have worked. But it's also ideal to have Cary Grant as the fallen millionaire and Jimmy Stewart as the falsely tough reporter. Joseph Cotton in Stewart's place might have looked like he believed in his own bluster, and Stewart's obvious disbelief in his own toughness sells his performance. Grant is superb, but I'd pay to see Gable in the same role for sure. I love Cary Grant, but sometimes I feel a little oversaturated, and I can never get enough Clark Gable. The movie begins in an intellectual chess match between the bride, her ex-husband, and the unenthusiastic reporter. Along the way, we have excellent performances by Virginia Wilder as Dinah, Tracy's wild younger sister.
Lydia, oh Lydia, say have you met Lydia, oh Lydia, the hand lady.
And Roland Young as the lecherous Uncle Willie. This is George Cukor, so it's not a big surprise that the directing is top-notch. The script is beyond brilliant, and everybody in the show gives prime performances. Chemistry between Hepburn and Stewart is very strong. It's very Pride and Prejudice, both providing plenty of both pride and prejudice. But through the course of the day, Hepburn gets bruised plenty by everybody. Her ex Dexter warns Tracy that she believes that she's a marble goddess. Her parents kick her out of any discussion of her father's philandering. Her father brutally insults her as the cause of his philandering. And then her own fiancé says that he thinks she's a marble goddess. I mean, she's obviously marrying the wrong guy. It all gets pretty rough. So Tracy gets herself thoroughly trashed and sneaks off for a moonlight swim with a reporter who seems to be the only person here who gets her. This may be the movie's weak spot. Stewart himself said he didn't really like the dialogue. It does sound a bit like how a writer would write dialogue for a writer in love.
All right, lay off that professor stuff now, do you hear me?
Yes, Professor.
The remainder of the film is basic rom-com. There's kissing, misunderstandings, punches thrown, and ultimately a happy ending. The dialogue, however, remains razor sharp, and the acting is brilliant on all sides. So, the cojones needed to do a remake of this movie are hard to fathom. First step, you invite Louis Armstrong, one of the most important musicians in American history, to play the Greek chorus, and to play it as himself. Armstrong's presence in this movie is outsized. I was surprised on a recent rewatch at how few scenes he's actually in. Next, how do you replace iconic actors like Carey Grant and Jimmy Stewart? Well, you recruit America's two best-living crooners. Bing Crosby plays a much simpler Dexter, and not Cary Grant's reformed but ready-to-explode loser with a heart of gold. And Frank Sinatra. His Macaulay Connor is much less intense than Stewart's. He gets robbed by the movie's chopped-down script, which replaces much of the character's complex emotions with some great Cole Porter songs. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Sensational, Mind If I Make Love to You, and What a Swell Party This Is. What a Swell Party is kind of a rumble in the Newport. Bing Crosby versus Frank Sinatra head to head. Bing comes out on top, although I'll confess I'm actually more of a fan of Sinatra.
Don't dig that kind of crooning, chum.
You must be one of the newer fellas.
And Hepburn versus Kelly. Well, that's exactly the sort of comparison that should have given these producers pause. Katherine Hepburn was born for the part, or rather the part was born for her. She's smart, she's athletic, she's cold, she's intellectual. Kelly is spectacularly beautiful.
I adore strangers.
And is not saddled like Hepburn with really awful wardrobe choices, but the reduced script doesn't give her much time to spread her wings. The third step, emphasize social class. Sort of. Both movies want to attack the idea of social class as,
Oh, class, my grandmother.
Philadelphia Story does it better with the Bedford Falls Jimmy Stewart as a tough writer who wants to fight class barriers. Frank Sinatra was a good actor, but he comes across as fighting for himself as a scrappy loner, whereas Stewart comes off as a genuine man of all the people. I guess that's why Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and It's a Wonderful Life did so well. Hepburn's battered narcissist is replaced by Kelly's graceful bride. In the original, Hepburn's caught at the library sneaking in Stewart's blue-collar short stories, and they have a nice tete-a-tete which sets up their attraction together. Kelly, on the other hand, nearly kidnaps Sinatra to force him on a tour of boarded-up mansions as a metaphor for her own life as a beautiful but discarded piece of property.
I don't fit into the landscape either. The house has been boarded up too long.
The movie prepares us for this with opening helicopter shots of Newport, Rhode Island. Sinatra replies by telling Kelly that she's not
The fair Miss Frigidaire.
And she's
Sensational.
Now, I love that song, but it doesn't really create a meaningful connection between the characters. He just kind of tells her she's attractive, and she likes that.
What I require is proper squire to find my heart.
But underneath this clunky and sexist metaphor about mansions lies the ghosts of Edith Wharton and Jane Austen. Wharton in the frustration that a divorced woman becomes spoiled goods, no matter how worthwhile she is, a topic not even hinted at in Philadelphia Story. Maybe a comment on the morals of 1930s America versus 1950s America. And Jane Austen appears in the division between who has a name, say Uncle Willie or C.K. Dexter Haven, and who actually has money and control. Uncle Willie is losing his estate, the one with the insane bar that swivels out of the wall when you grab Charles Darwin off the bookshelf. Dexter has resorted to songwriting for cash. In the original, he had followed Tracy's brother Junius to South America, presumably to escape the tabloids and clear his head. High society could have profited here by keeping the scurrilous newspaper editor as a villain, the man of the people who's actually the man out for himself. Some people are Elizabeth Bennets with money that they can't reach. And some people have funds but not a distinguished name. Grace Kelly's Sam fears ending up like Miss Bennet. Social mobility, or the dream of it, is a constant theme in this movie.
Can you dig old Satchmo swinging in the beautiful high society?
The movie's fluffiest song, Now You Has Jazz, is clearly set up to show that jazz, America's gift to the world of music, was foreign to these high society types. And for squares who don't get jazz, it's actually not a bad introduction to the concept of soloing over a simple melody. And it's worth noticing that Armstrong brings an integrated band to this all-white party, a year before he championed the Little Rock Nine. Along with Dave Brubeck and a few others, he was using music as a way to mainstream the fall of segregation. High society makes Dexter's songwriting the reason for his and Tracy's divorce. Jazz is too low a career choice for him.
You could have become a serious composer. And what have you become? A jukebox hero.
A much less complex issue than his alcoholism and probable domestic violence in the original, which leads to the fourth tactic this movie uses to be relevant. Cole Porter. Porter once said that polished urbane and adult playwriting in the musical field is strictly a creative luxury. Well, he luxuriates here.
Who wants an opera box, I'll bet?
I don't, and sleep through Wagner at the Met.
I don't.
And also offers some swanky romantic ballads as well.
Mind if I make love to you?
The lyricism is casual and fun, and it matches both Crosby and Armstrong's styles perfectly. Sinatra does great with it too, but Sinatra does great with everything. The runtime of High Society is about 10 minutes shorter than the Philadelphia story, and it has to make way for the songs, so the plot gets chopped down quite a bit. The intrigue of the newspaper blackmail is almost entirely removed. Grace Kelly is robbed of some of the scenes that make Katherine Hepburn's journey impactful. Hepburn gets run through the ringer, and Kelly is mostly just embarrassed. That makes High Society a much more fun and family-friendly film, but frankly also a less intellectual one. So this leads me to some obscure headcanon. Picture this. You keep Louis Armstrong as the Greek chorus, and you keep all the songs, but insert them into Philadelphia Story. If I could have a Tracy Samantha Lord as beautiful as Grace Kelly, but as tough and smart as Katherine Hepburn, I would take it. A Clark Gable who can occasionally,
Let me see now.
like Bing Crosby? Yes. The intrigue from Philadelphia Story, slimmed down a little with less dialogue, but not as much pruning as it gets in High Society. Yeah, in the end you'd have a screwball comedy that gives His Girl Friday or It Happened One Night a run for their money. But that's just headcanon for you.